The hull of the research cruiser Salix groaned under the strain of atmospheric entry as thin violet clouds streaked past the viewport. Inside, the temperature was perfectly regulated, the lighting soft and constant. The students of the Interstellar Xenological Institute, most barely out of their second molt or neural maturation, clustered around the observation dome, watching the blue-green arc of Earth come into full view. "I still don't understand why we study them," Ural muttered, his eye ridges twitching in distaste as he adjusted the strap of his translator node. "They're unpredictable," Sen replied. "Unstable, extremely injury-averse. Their entire medical industry is built around avoiding pain." "That's what makes them interesting," said Instructor Helix calmly from his seat, his pale green arm curling around a data pad. "Humans fear damage, they avoid it obsessively, and yet they survive more than they should. Today you'll see why we study them." The shuttle detached from the cruiser and descended toward the Earth outpost located in the Nevada Exo-Cultural Alliance Zone. The students were jittery with anticipation. Some had never seen a human in person. Korven Galley, the human assigned as their field liaison, waited beside a beige prefab structure that looked like it had been assembled in a rush, then forgotten about. He stood tall, even as the wind kicked up desert grit into his brown hair and across his sun-seared face. His uniform clung to him uncomfortably. The thin bandage around his left forearm was visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve. The shuttle's ramp hissed open, and the students disembarked in a single file, their elongated limbs and glistening skin shimmering slightly in the sun. "Welcome to Earth," Korven said, his voice dry but not unfriendly. "Hope you brought sunscreen." Sen blinked slowly. "We do not secrete oils like you, we do not burn." Korven tilted his head. "Lucky you." Ural stepped forward, scanning Korven's exposed arm. "You are injured." Korven glanced at the bandage. "Yeah, scratched it 2 days ago, fence wire, not a big deal." "You allow harm to remain untreated." Ural's pupils dilated in alarm. Korven chuckled faintly. "It's treated, just not the way you're used to, I guess." Sen leaned toward Ural and whispered, "They fear damage, remember." Korven's brow lifted slightly. "You guys know I can hear you, right?" Helix stepped forward. "Mr. Galley, we appreciate your cooperation. The students will be shadowing you during your day-to-day operations. Please proceed as normal." Korven nodded and waved them toward the compound. "All right then, try not to touch anything glowing or leaking, and if you see a snake, don't assume it's friendly." Inside, the lab was cluttered but functional, with scattered tools, a few drone parts, and several data terminals humming softly. Korven picked up a canister and tossed it into a bin without looking. The students followed in a semicircle, eyes wide. Ural pointed at a framed photo on the wall. "Is this your family unit?" "Yeah, my sister, her kid, and my mom, all back in Oregon." "How do you prevent injury to offspring?" Sen asked. Korven scratched his neck. "We try not to let them fall off anything high." "Yet you allow them to climb," Ural pressed. "They're gonna climb anyway," Korven said. "Better to teach 'em how to fall right." That answer caused ripples of confusion among the students. Helix raised a brow ridge but said nothing. Later that afternoon, Korven took them outside to inspect a damaged surveying drone. The student stood back as he squatted beside the machine, pried open its casing, and began reworking the circuitry with a soldering tool. The desert wind picked up again, and Korven wiped sweat from his brow. Suddenly the wind shifted, carrying a sharp hiss. Korven's head snapped up. "Back up now." The students hesitated. "Move." They scrambled backward just as a sidewinder rattlesnake slithered from a crevice under the drone. Korven lunged sideways, grabbing a metal rod from the ground. The snake struck, its fangs grazing Korven's boot. "Stay still," he muttered, watching the snake coil again. It lunged, and he swung. The rod connected, sending the creature tumbling away into the dust. The students stared, stunned. Korven exhaled, then turned. "Everyone okay?" "You were attacked," Sen said. "Fang exposure." "Boot took the brunt," Korven said, moving to sit down on a nearby crate. He pulled off his boot, inspecting a torn section of leather, then peeled down his sock. A shallow puncture on his ankle oozed blood. "Minimal penetration," he muttered. "We must summon a medical unit," Ural said, already reaching for his communicator. Korven waved him off. "Wait, I've got the kits." He opened a nearby case and took out a small injector, a vial, and a bandage. The students watched in horror as he cleaned the wound with a wince, injected antivenom, then wrapped it tightly. His hands trembled slightly, but his face remained focused. "You are not panicking," Sen observed. "Oh, I'm not thrilled about it," Korven said through clenched teeth, "but panic doesn't help." Ural looked at Helix. "He is injured, he should be incapacitated." Helix nodded slowly, "So we assumed." Korven got to his feet, limping slightly. "Look, I'll stay off it for the rest of the day, but I'm not going to the ER for a nick." "You administered your own antivenom," Sen said, "without error." "I've done it before, used to hike a lot in Arizona." Ural took a step closer. "You are not afraid of injury." Korven met his gaze. "Of course I am, but sometimes you don't get the luxury of waiting for someone else to fix you." That night back in the compound, the students whispered among themselves while Korven sat with his leg propped up and a hydration pack at his side. His face was pale, and he was clearly in pain, but he remained alert. Sen approached. "You are not like the others we've studied." Korven chuckled weakly. "I'm a pretty average guy, believe it or not." "You do not act like one who fears harm." "I do, I just don't let it stop me from doing what needs doing." Ural sat beside him. "You're kind, you adapt." Korven didn't respond right away. He watched the stars through the dome, then turned back to them. "We have to. Earth throws a lot at us. Weather, terrain, animals, each other. We get hurt, we lose people. But if we stopped every time we were scared of it, we'd never get anything done." Helix stepped forward. "Tomorrow, we will study your medical protocols in more detail." Korven smirked faintly. "Just don't ask me to do any more live demonstrations." "I would prefer you didn't," Sen said quickly. Korven laughed, then winced. "Fair." Later, when he finally lay down to rest, the pain in his leg throbbed constantly, a reminder that he wasn't invincible. But he knew what to expect. He'd be stiff for a while, limp for a few days, but he'd heal. The students returned to their bunks in silence, each wrestling with what they'd seen. Injury, they had assumed, was the great deterrent of human behavior, but now they weren't so sure. By early morning, the desert wind had settled into a steady hum, brushing sand against the prefab walls like a warning. Inside the compound, the air held a faint chemical tang from the sterilization unit that had been running overnight. Korven was already awake, seated at the corner table with his leg balanced on a toolbox. The bandage on his ankle had darkened in one spot, and a half-empty cup of strong coffee steamed beside his elbow. He chewed on a dried fruit bar, grimacing between bites. Across the room, the students filed in, their movements more cautious than the day before. Sen lingered by the door, eyes flickering between Korven and the medical kit on the shelf. Ural circled the table, noting the swelling around Korven's ankle without comment. None of them said anything for a while. "Didn't sleep much," Korven said eventually, nudging a folder toward the center of the table with the back of his knuckle. "But I filled out the incident report. Don't let the bureaucrats say I'm not compliant." Sen picked up the folder, opened it, and tilted his head. "This is handwritten. Printer out of toner again. There are smudges. Blood probably, or coffee, hard to tell." Ural leaned in closer. "You are still functional. For now, let's see how long the leg agrees with me. Why not administer another dose of antivenom?" "Because I already reached the safe limit for my body weight. Too much and my kidneys will start complaining." Sen lowered the file. "How do you know this?" Korven cracked his neck. "You pick up things when you don't always have the luxury of waiting in a hospital lobby." The silence returned, thicker this time. One of the younger students, barely tall enough to see over the table, pointed to Korven's ankle. "It's red. That is not optimal, correct?" "Nope," Korven said. "It's angry. I'll ice it later, once I convince the freezer to stop freezing everything except ice." Helix entered from the side room, already reviewing a data tablet. Today's schedule includes a field demonstration on terrain navigation and emergency extraction protocol. Korven raised a brow. "You want me to hike?" "It is your area of expertise," the students will observe. "No physical exertion is required beyond your comfort threshold." "Comfort's not how I measure it. Let's say I'll go until my leg tells me to stop." Ural looked unconvinced. "Your physiology is compromised." Which makes it a perfect time to demonstrate real-world limitations. By midday, they had moved out onto the ridge southeast of the compound. The sun bore down with no mercy, but Korven moved steadily, his gait uneven but determined. A drone hovered above, recording the excursion while feeding telemetry to the students' visors. Korven picked his way up a low incline, pausing when he reached a cluster of jagged shale. "All right, this is where things get interesting. Loose stone, uneven grade, and no handholds. Now imagine you're out here with a busted comms array and a twisted ankle. What do you do?" Sen tapped a note into his device. Request aerial extraction. No signal, that's the point. Activate emergency beacon. Also damaged. Remain still and wait for rescue. Korven gestured at the landscape. And risk heatstroke, not unless you want your rescuers to find something jerky-shaped. Ural frowned. You would move while injured. Korven crouched to examine a narrow crevice beside the path. You don't really have a choice, you improvise. He pulled a compact emergency splint from his belt and extended it with a snap. Then he reached into his pack, retrieving a roll of self-adhering wrap and a foam pad. Let's say the injury's worse than mine, you brace it like this. He removed the bandage on his ankle with practiced efficiency, revealing skin that had turned a mottled red-purple. The students recoiled slightly, but none spoke. Korven laid the foam beneath the ankle, angled the splint to match his leg contour, then secured it with the wrap. His hands moved swiftly, each motion deliberate. Ural stepped closer. You are increasing the pressure on the wound. Compression helps manage swelling, reduces internal bleeding. Sen crouched beside him. But wouldn't immobilizing the joint reduce mobility? Not entirely. It stabilizes it, makes it safer to move. You trade speed for sustainability. The older student nodded slowly, then turned to the others. He is performing triage on himself. No one else is out here, Korven said, standing again with a grunt. You get used to being your own medic. They continued deeper into the rocks, Korven occasionally pausing to demonstrate how to use terrain features for support or cover. When they reached a dry wash, he dropped into a crouch and pointed to a bush with waxy leaves. Creosote smells like rain. We boil it for antiseptic wash in a pinch. Sen sniffed the air. It is pungent. Yeah, don't drink it, not unless you want an afternoon of regret. An hour later, they reached a shaded alcove where the temperature dropped noticeably. Korven sat down heavily, leaning back against the rock. Break time, hydrate or evaporate. Ural examined his splinted ankle. The swelling has increased. Expected, I'll elevate it when we get back. You intend to walk all the way back. Unless you're offering a piggyback ride. Ural looked confused. I do not understand. Korven chuckled and took a long drink from his water bottle. Never mind. Helix, who had remained mostly silent, activated a small pulse beacon and checked the drone's signal. We will pause here for 30 minutes, then we return. The students wandered slightly, scanning the surrounding terrain or making quiet observations. Sen remained beside Korven. You measure acceptable risk differently than we do. Maybe, or maybe we just got used to losing guarantees. You anticipate pain as part of the process. It's not about wanting it, it's about not letting it stop you. Sen looked at the splint again. You improvise treatment without hesitation. Korven's eyes tracked a hawk circling overhead. Hesitation doesn't help when you're bleeding. Later, during their descent, Korven's pace slowed. He didn't speak much, focusing on keeping his balance. The students remained close, not out of obligation, but something quieter attention, perhaps. Not concern in the way they understood it, but a recognition of something they hadn't seen before. When they reached level ground again, Korven collapsed onto the nearest bench outside the compound and peeled off the splint. His foot throbbed visibly, and he let out a low hiss. Ural handed over a cold gel pack from the cooler. Apply this. Korven nodded and pressed it against the joint. Thanks. You should not have exerted yourself. Probably not. You still did. Korven leaned back, eyes closed. Yeah. That evening, during their debrief in the observation room, Helix posed a question. Based on today's demonstration, how would you revise your understanding of human injury response? Sen answered first. They do not ignore pain, they anticipate it, then plan around it. Ural added they calculate risk differently, not to avoid harm but to make harm survivable. Helix nodded. And what implications does this have for our broader study? No one answered right away. Then the smallest student who hadn't spoken since arrival raised a hand. They don't fear injury the way we thought, they fear not being able to continue. Korven, still icing his foot nearby, didn't look up, but he smiled into the darkness just a little. By the third day, the compound's air recycler had started to emit a faint, burnt ozone smell, and no one could figure out why. Korven had taken to propping open the back door with a wrench to let in some fresher desert air, despite the occasional windstorm that blew in sand and once, inexplicably, a bird feather. The students were gathered around the central workbench, watching Korven disassemble a field transmitter that had suffered heat warping. The casing crackled slightly as it came apart, exposing a nest of copper coils and a melted capacitor. "That's a structural failure," Korven said, nudging the burnt component with a screwdriver. "Too much sun, these aren't rated for this temperature." Sen leaned in. "Why install it here then?" "Because it was what we had. Geocom sent the wrong batch, again." Ural tapped his datapad. "You knew it would degrade." "I figured it might, but I also knew I could replace the part if it failed. It's easier to fix a mistake than wait 6 weeks for a perfect shipment." "You are comfortable operating with flawed equipment." "I'm comfortable solving problems faster than they arrive." Korven slipped on a pair of heat-resistant gloves and began prying loose the damaged board. The students kept a respectful distance this time after yesterday's minor shock incident, which had launched a screwdriver across the room and prompted a 6-minute safety lecture from Helix. "Is that carbon scoring?" asked one of the smaller students, pointing. "Yeah, it arced when the seal cracked." Here, Korven held up the board, letting them get a better look. "This is what happens when insulation fails under load in dry air. It jumps, then it cooks." Sen tilted his head. "And you are replacing it with a duplicate component." Korven reached into a drawer and pulled out a board that had clearly been scavenged from a different device. "Not quite. This is from an old survey array, different specs but close enough. I'll reroute the voltage regulator." Ural frowned. "You are modifying it without a schematic." "I've done it before." "You remember the circuitry." "I remember the patterns. After a while you stop memorizing parts and start recognizing behavior. Electricity doesn't lie." Korven fitted the new board, adjusted the pins, and began re-soldering the connections. The smell of flux filled the air, sharp and acrid. He didn't wear a mask. "That is a chemical irritant," said Sen. "Only if you breathe too much of it. I'll crack the other window in a second." "You expose yourself to avoid delay." "I expose myself to keep working." Once the board was in place, Korven powered up the transmitter. It hummed, then gave a low chirp. Ural blinked. "Is it functional?" "Functional enough," Korven said, already reassembling the casing. "Signal's clean, range is within spec, good for now." Helix, who had been monitoring from a corner terminal, approached. "We've received confirmation that the supply transport is arriving this afternoon. The students will observe unloading and inventory protocols." Korven sighed. "Then I better get the dolly prepped." At mid-afternoon, the transport touched down with a gust of dust that coated everything in a fresh layer of grit. The supply crew, 2 humans in reflective vests and 1 very overeager forklift drone, began unloading crates by the compound's side entrance. Korven limped out with the students trailing behind. The swelling in his ankle had gone down, but his gait remained uneven. He didn't complain. "Stack those on the concrete slab. Check each manifest tag before moving them," he told the students. Sen scanned a crate. "This says Medical Stabilization Unit." "Great," Korven muttered. "That's the one they were supposed to send last month." He cracked it open. Inside was a compact field stretcher, a set of trauma dressings, and a portable monitor. "It's all here," he said. "That's a first." Ural crouched beside the open crate. "You have used these devices." "Too many times." "You are not a medic." "No, but I've had to act like one." Korven turned, then paused. The forklift drone had gone rogue, turning in wide, jerky arcs. One of its wheels dragged a cable, which had snagged on a fuel canister. "Hey," Korven jogged forward. "Stop." The drone clipped the canister, knocking it sideways. It wobbled, then tipped. The cap popped loose with a hiss. Korven didn't hesitate. He darted forward, shoved the drone aside with one shoulder, and grabbed the canister. Fuel splashed across his arm and soaked into his shirt. He set it upright, then twisted the cap back into place. The students froze. "That was flammable," Sen said slowly. "Yeah, and it still is." "You are saturated with volatile liquid." Korven peeled off his shirt with one hand and threw it into a bin. "It'll evaporate. I'll shower in a bit." "Why did you intervene physically?" "Because if that canister ignited, you'd all be learning emergency protocol a lot faster than you wanted." Ural stared at the red patches on Korven's arm. "Your epidermis is irritated." "It'll sting, not the worst thing I've had on me this month." Korven walked to the water station, opened the valve, and rinsed his arm under the stream. The students followed, watching silently. You are not compelled to avoid danger, Sen said. I just don't let it get ahead of me. You placed your body between risk and others. Korven dried his arm with a rag. That's not unique to humans. But you did not hesitate. I don't have the luxury. Helix approached, his tone neutral. Mr. Galley, you are permitted to delegate physical tasks to the crew. I know, but I also know that drone, it's got a wiring glitch. It's easier to stop it than explain it. The rest of the supplies were unloaded without incident. The students helped stack crates and verify counts, but their attention remained split. They kept glancing at Korven as if trying to reconcile something. That evening, after the sun dropped below the ridge and the compound's lights flickered on with a low hum, Korven sat outside with a towel around his neck, sipping water. The students gathered nearby, unprompted. You have demonstrated multiple responses to harm, Sen said. I guess I have. Are all humans like you? Ural asked. No, some are braver, some are smarter, some would have walked away. I just do what I can with what I know. Your knowledge is not formal, one of the younger students said. Nope, it's ugly and practical, the kind you don't get from books. Sen looked at the others, then back at Korven. We came to study your species through observation. We expected to document avoidance patterns. You still can. I avoid plenty of things, I just pick my moments. Ural folded his arms. You are not fearless, but you do not freeze. I think most people move when it matters. There was a long pause. The wind shifted again, brushing cool air across the compound. The students didn't speak, but they didn't leave either. They simply sat, watching the sky. Eventually, Helix spoke. You have provided more insight than we anticipated. Korven nodded, glad to help. You've clarified something that data could not. What's that? Helix looked at him with an unreadable expression. How you survive. Korven didn't answer, he didn't need to. The next morning, the students departed with their samples, recordings, and notes. No one mentioned the ankle, the fuel spill, or the solder burns on Korven's fingers. They didn't need to. They had seen enough.